Mr. Buster Flips! Mr. Buster Flips! Mr. Buster Flips! Mr. Buster Flips!
After my video last week, a few people asked for an example of how to apply the 5W method in analyzing a text. So I'm going to do this video now to demonstrate how I would use that 5W method in analyzing a poem. This is the poem from the November 2012 paper for the IB higher level. So feel free to print that off if you want and do an analysis of yourself and then contrast your ideas to mine as you go through. I'm not going to read the whole poem for you, but rather I'm doing 3 quick still images, and you can stop the video and read the poem and think about the poem as you go along before you start listening to my unpacking of it. So here is the first stanza. And this is the second stanza. And here is the third stanza. So now that we've had a read of the poem, we can start coming up with some answers to those questions from the previous video. So the first question was, who is the speaker? Who is writing this? And we get a distinct voice. We don't know exactly who this person is, obviously, by name or that sort of thing, but it is someone who's philosophizing about the future and what role books will play in the future, right? So at least we know that much. And then the second question we asked ourselves in that last video was, to whom is it directed? Is there a particular... and again, there is a clear direction here in the first line. Is it too strange to think? He is asking a question of us. So that rhetorical question is straight away engaging an implicit narrative, i.e. us, to philosophize about the future. The third question we then asked ourselves was, why? Right? Why is this poem written? Why is the person philosophizing about the future? Well, clearly, given the title, The Last of the Books, it is trying to emphasize the importance or the longevity of the written word, and how books that we write will outlast all humans and remain on Earth for a future alien race to come and perceive. In response to the questions about context and setting, when and where, we don't really have a concrete answer. It is presumably set in the present, as we are considering what's going to happen in the future. But beyond that, we don't really get a concrete answer to that. And then lastly, to finish getting a sense of what this poem is really about, what is the subject matter? And I've already touched upon that in the why question, to deal with the importance of what we write and how what might seem as insignificant writings at the time of their creation might turn out to be really important pieces in the future, as the written word will outlast all the humans who have written them. This then brings us on to obviously the most important question for us in terms of writing a commentary, which is the how aspect. What are the central techniques used here by Alfred Noyes to convey this idea of the books and their importance? So let's have a bit of a look at the form. If we look at the overall form, we can see that the poem is built of 3 stanzas and 3 sentences. Each stanza is 1 sentence, so we only have 3 sort of conclusive punctuation marks. There's 1 question mark and 2 full stops to conclude the 2. It's rhymed throughout, and the rhyming pattern is mirrored in the typographical indentation. So we have clearly indented line 2 and 4, for example, to indicate that they rhyme together. We use, or Noyes uses pretty much throughout, iambic pentameter, with some exceptions. The first line on each stanza is trimeter, and there's also a couple of hexameter lines, but essentially we're using a loose iambic pentameter, which could be important in evoking a sense of literary tradition and the roots of English poetry. But it could also be it is also part of forming the mood of the poem, and I think it's important to go through this poem. I think it's valid to go through this poem stanza by stanza because there's a clear progression of ideas, and there's a clear shift in the mood. The mood is somber throughout, but there is a shift from, I would say, hope in the opening stanza to more of a neutral, descriptive second stanza to back to hope, or potential for hope at least, in that the books can provide us a longer life. I think this sense of hope comes through in the last two lines when the and this is emphasized through alliteration both in line 22 and in line 24 when the aliens come to visit and they use their curious weapons to burst the bars of the cages where the books are, and they lift the books up and they bear their stranger secrets through the stars. That sibilant whisper, which is sort of emphasizing a whisper through the ages, showing that, in fact, their human books have become more important than these powerful weapons that have just exploded the walls. I would say that the most obvious reading of that last word, the word in the last line, stranger, is that it's something that's more strange, and it echoes the strange thought in the first line of the poem. However, there is an interesting, I guess, ambiguity or pun to that word stranger, because it also could obviously mean the secrets coming from strangers, i.e. the humans. And these sort of puns are something that Noyes plays with throughout the poem. For instance, in line 8, in the first stanza, the last word in the first stanza, tenderest fancies born of youth and May. He has capitalized May to indicate the month and the spring and the new ideas that come. But May also obviously brings the connotation of doubt and speculation, because we're not quite sure. That word also brings, obviously, insecurity or potential. And the third example of this ambiguity we have in the second stanza and the first line, where the books are described as a quiet, remembering host. Obviously, the word host bringing both the connotation of group, as in a host of daffodils in Wordsworth, or in the holy plate that we use to carry the bread in communion on. Both of these obviously having very different meanings in terms of how important the books are. So I've gone through and done some annotations of what I think are the central techniques in the poem, and I just want to point out a few of those for you. I would definitely, if I was looking at this poem, talk about the first stanza in the sense of uncertainty and potential. We got that rhetorical question up here: is it too strange to think? Blah blah blah. So setting up that hypothesis, and then that's continue with the doubtful tone in line 5. It may abide, and then we've already talked about that pun in the word may down the bottom. So it's all setting up that potential of this could potentially happen. So I think that's important in the first stanza. If you look at the second stanza, that's more descriptive, if you like. And it's interesting, the tone, I would say, it's somber, and it's got an interesting mix here of imagery that has to do with mortality and I guess imagery of birth. So we have repeated references to dust, to ghost, to fading hieroglyphs, lilac, which, though it's a spring flower, is often dealing with a sort of memory of someone that we've lost. At the same time, we're talking about humans who gave them birth. And I guess the word little kind of implies a youth of some sense. We've got the spring, and lilac, as I said, is a spring flower after all. So that it's an interesting mix there of loss and rebirth, which ties well into the idea of humans. That generation of humanity is gone, but through books, perhaps we have gained a sense of longevity and prolonged life. And then if we move on to the third stanza, I guess what's really crucial here is that sense of the strangers arriving from another planet, because we've got continual references here to strange voyages, strange voices, strange flares, strange hands, and yet with all their strangeness and their might and their power to travel across space, the strangest secrets of our books, so the fact that the human books are more important and stronger than these aliens. The last point I'd like to make about the sound of the poem generically is the fact that even though the poem essentially is about books generically, and that would draw us maybe to look at non-fiction and fiction, he seems to be really striking a blow for poetry and books of song and tender fancies that he mentions in lines 7 and 8, because this poem relies so heavily on sound. There are a lot of sound devices that drive the poem. We've talked previously about the fact that enjambment is featured throughout, and every stanza is one sentence, and then maybe the commas come in as kind of caesuras to give us break and pause between, or just to slow down the pace occasionally. But it's also using rhyme, both internal and end rhyme, to emphasize ideas, as well as assonance, alliteration, repetition. All of these to provide that sense of a musical quality to the words, to emphasize how they can provide further longevity, because we more easily remember potentially words that are in a verse form. I also want to make sure that you are clear on the fact that this I've told you to spend 20 to 30 minutes doing your annotations plus your plan. I would say, I'd have to confess that I probably spent 35-40 minutes doing my annotations of this passage, so I wouldn't expect anyone really to cover this much material in your personal annotations if you're only doing 15 or so minutes before you start bringing it together into an essay plan. But here's an idea of things that you could pick out in this poem. You certainly wouldn't cover all these things, and I certainly wouldn't plan to use all these in an essay anyway. But annotate as much as you can in that time limit that you have. Having gotten this far, it's now time for us to bring this together into some sort of essay plan. And the first thing you want to do is come up with a thesis, and then come back to your main points the notes you took before about the who's writing and why they're writing and what are they writing about. So the obvious thing in this case, I would say, is Noy's comment on the written word and its longevity. So you might come up with a thesis something like this. In his poem, The Last of the Books, Alfred Noyes suggests that not only will the books we write outlive mankind, but they may even give us immortality. Because this is the idea that we get in the first, from the first to the third stanza. You then want to go on and break this into 3 or 4 main ideas for your body paragraphs. And as I suggested before, I think in this poem it makes sense to do essentially 1 paragraph per stanza to start off with. So for stanza 1, you might come up with something like this. You might say that the poet introduces the potential idea that books will outlast life on our planet. And as evidence for this, you can bring up, obviously, what we talked about before, the rhetorical question in the first line, the doubtful tone, the pun in the last word, may, at the end of the stanza, as well as the contrast of the books that are preserved being dumb books of song and tenderest fancy. So look at the diction there and what he's insinuating of the books, but still they outlast humans. The second stanza, you could say something like, Noyes emphasizes the idea of books' longevity further by contrasting it with fragile humans. And this idea of human fragility comes through, obviously, in a number of ways. Humans, we use metonymy. He uses metonymy in line 10 and talks about humans as poor dust, and dust that gave birth to the books. So we personify in the books while metonymically making humans into dust, to contrast that idea. We talked previously about the references to spring, to lilac scenting, etc., to show the rebirth that's coming through books. So particularly, I think the diction here, the language they use, the illusions that the word words bring that show how the books have potential for growth, whereas humans are at the end of their existence. For the third topic sentence, I would say something like the poet further elevates books and their importance maybe by showing their impact on visitors from other civilizations. So here again you can obviously explore the word strange and how it's overutilized in that last stanza, and put kind of turned on its head in the last line where the books become stranger than the strangers. You can talk about that sibilant whisper that we mentioned before in the last line and how that provides longevity for the books in that they whisper through time to these strangers. And maybe look at the irony of the whole thing and how that the ideas are put in reverse in the last line. I would probably then go on to do a fourth paragraph as well if I was writing an essay on this particular topic, because I feel that we haven't quite delved into the why of the poem yet. Why is it written? What's the importance of it? What's Neu's actual message here? To go a bit deeper with that. So I would probably have a fourth topic sentence as well and write a fourth paragraph. And that fourth paragraph would probably start with the topic sentence something like this. In his poem, the poet seeks to praise human creativity and art while also reminding us about how fragile our very existence is. That allows you to talk about the poem more holistically, and you could really bring up any of those broader techniques that we've talked about to explore how, on the one hand, he's encouraging us to write, but also be careful about what we write, because obviously these things will be testaments to human creativity as a whole. But it is a way for us to preserve ourselves for the afterworld. So at the end of your 30 minutes planning time, you roughly should have something like this. You should have your thesis written out, your topic sentence for your first paragraph, and then 3 to 4 bits of evidence to support that topic sentence, your second topic sentence and your evidence for that, your third topic sentence and the evidence for that, etc. So that you've got a clear idea of what's going to be in each paragraph and what evidence will support those points. And as I said before, I'd rather spend more time doing this planning so that you can write a cohesive, lucid thesis or essay, rather than having to jump back and forth and insert evidence later on, or even contradict yourself when you come towards the conclusion. It's really important that you hold your thesis throughout the essay and that your final conclusion will correlate with your initial introduction. Hopefully this has been helpful, and you've got a clearer sense of how to use this method for a commentary. Once again, if there's anything else that I can help to clarify, or if you would like any additional help in this area or in any other area, please post a comment below or send me a message and I can see how much help I can render. Best of luck, we'll see you soon.